Welcome to Inspire Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower, educate, and inspire men in a positive way. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
How's about a warm welcome, everybody? I'm glad that you're joining me again for another episode of Inspire Change. So I thought I would only do one podcast around the issue of Will Smith and his unfortunate behaviour at the Oscars. But after reviewing the last episode and thinking about it, and also going through some of the media coverage of the event, I decided there was actually a bit of a gold mine in this whole thing. It was rich with stuff that, we should be discussing, in our community, especially us men. This is, why do good men do bad things? And we can apply that whole problem to a whole range of arenas. Again, coming back, the war in the Ukraine is continuing. Now we have evidence of atrocities. And not all of these people are terrible people, evil people, but they're, generally speaking, people who do bad things or evil things. And the Abu Ghraib issue was a good example of that. People in the right situation, within a system that in a sense lets that behaviour loose, committed atrocities. So before I get any deeper and gloomier, I want to set the stage, because I think what we actually need to pull out of this experience with Will Smith and Chris Rock is, what can we learn? What is it that we can get out of this that is actually going to expand our consciousness to something that allows us to get to a place where, we're not drawn into bad or evil things, that we can say, look, now here's the line in the sand, no further. And I think that's a really important way to look at this. So I thought, okay, what's the key thing here that I want to focus on in this particular podcast episode after the one on Will Smith? What's in a slap? And I decided that this podcast is going to be titled, "What is this thing called love?" Because one of Will's excuses was, love makes you do crazy things. Now, part of this podcast is going to draw on personal experience, and it's going to draw on, the experiences of some of my clients whom I'll keep anonymous, but, sort of mix up in a more generic way. But the other thing that I want to do is I really want to get down into what's the psychology. Where does psychology stand with respect to love, relationships, attraction, and romance? We need to get a bit of a handle on this. So in other words, we're going to go from the experiential to the academic a little bit, but not making it too heavy. So firstly, let's elevate the question. Does love actually make you do crazy things? Okay. So let me draw a little bit on my own experience, because as a person who's now in my 60s, I've had a lot of experience in dealing with my own growth and, that of other people. And so what I want to do is I want to share a little bit about my experience about this thing called love and relationships, attraction, romance. So usually as a teenager, most of us have the experience that we sort of get, hot for a girl. It can happen from any time from 14 onwards. And we become sort of obsessive with this particular person. We think about them, we fantasize about them. We mightn't be doing anything with them, but, the whole obsessive quality is there. right? So we might have a few of these relationships, right? Now, as we get older, the relationship often comes into fruition, and the way that it comes to fruition is we become sexually active with each other. And a lot of times that relationship is really very much focused on physical attraction and lust. Okay, so let's park that idea at this point in terms of love and go and whack lust into it. Now, my experience is that, we can be in lust 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. And you go, whoa, what? This guy's a bit of a freak. I'm going, lusting is not something that is a bonding, binding, committed relationship or form of relating. It's just what turns me on in that moment. So that's a very important distinction. So the first distinction that I want to draw out is we need to differentiate lust from love. And attraction initially, quite often in our culture, is about lust. The other part of it, the social part of it, is romance, right? So, the idea of being romantic, a lot of guys get, they're binary often. They're either super romantic, where they love bomb their, potential new partner, or they come across as not caring, like, yeah, she's, play hard to get, and, she'll want you even more. Bit of a game people sometimes play, which is completely off the charts. Okay? So part of the process then is as I get older and I've had more experience with relationships, I can have a relationship that suddenly went from friendship to a sexual relationship. So, we can become friends with benefits, but that doesn't still mean that we're committed to each other. It means just that we in this moment together having a good time, and that may last for a few weeks or it might last for a couple of months, but there is no sense that this is going to go further. For some people, they find it very difficult to draw the distinction. Okay, now, in a little bit, I'm going to get into why that might be. So, essentially, as I get older and more mature, I'm going to begin to have a different approach to loving relationships and lustful relationships. I'm going to, be clear about, do I make commitments and how do I make commitments? Okay? So, in this situation with Will Smith, it was the slap that rocked the world. Why did it rock the world? And why was his sort of apology, and it wasn't really a full-blown apology initially, a problem in my view? And part of that was because my assessment of how he went about this was rather emotionally immature. Okay? For a start, any form of violence, unless I'm being threatened by violence myself, is unacceptable in my book. Now, I've reiterated that. I'm going to stick with that. Okay? So to then suggest that I'm becoming violent in order to protect my partner, that says more about myself than firstly it does about my partner, and it says a lot more about what's going on for me internally. Okay. So then how do we define love? Right, that becomes the biggie, right? Now, in psychology, there's a very interesting and important framework, Sternberg's model of the triangle of love. So Sternberg's got a really interesting model, and he talks about it from the perspective that it's a triangle. It's a triangular model of love. That is that love has fundamentally 3 components: intimacy, passion, and commitment. So intimacy is about the degree of closeness between two individuals. Passion's based on sexuality, physical attraction, and romance. And commitment is the set of thought processes like deciding to be in a relationship with that person and pondering over the implications of long-term relationships. So that's a really interesting way to look at this. Okay, so we're now talking about moving away from the idea that lust and love are rolled necessarily into the same thing. They can be separate. But when we're talking about love in the long-term context, we're really approaching a very different sort of story. And I think that's really important. I think we really do need to differentiate. I work with lots of boys and men who are challenged with that whole thing. They find it a struggle to differentiate when it's just lust, when it's a friendship, and when it's moving into this committed stage of relating. So, as a young guy, how do I assess the whole issue? And I'm not necessarily talking about young guys. I mean, God forbid if something happened to my partner now, would I possibly partner up with somebody else? I don't think so, but it could happen. You never know, right? So what are some of the things that are going to help me make a decision about this new person that's going to come into my life? What am I looking for? Well, there's a way of looking at this that suggests that there could be 5 elements that are fundamentally important about what love really is. One is belongingness. Do you feel connected? The second one's proximity. How close are you to someone? And that's not just physical. The third one is observable characteristics, i.e. what do you see in others? The next one's similarity. How alike are you? And the fifth one is reciprocity. Now, these things are actually good benchmarks because we need to ask ourselves, okay, well, why is it that relationships often go pear-shaped? Why do people, fall in love? But why do they fall out of love? What happens there? Now, my experience is that a lot of relationships get into difficulties because there are attachment problems, okay? And in psychology, we talk a lot about secure attachment, which is an emotionally mature adult place to be, okay? But there are a couple permutations on the theme. One is that a lot of people have an anxious attachment style. So they frequently to have unhappy relationships or probably may not form close ones because they've never experienced intimacy, closeness, especially in their bonded relationship with their parents. The other one is avoidant. In other words, the person actually actively, in their own way, sometimes subconsciously, avoids intimate connection. And then the other one is being ambivalent. And so imagine being a partner to someone who's anxious or avoidant or ambivalent in their way, in their attachment to you as their love object, for want of a better word. It's going to get pretty bumpy. In fact, it's going to get so bumpy that at some point or another, the relationship cracks. Now, there are a couple of indicators that can signal when a relationship is in the red zone, apart from the attachment. Behaviors. The key thing is about how the person articulates values. So when a person says that they love you, but they behave in a poor way, either in a critical, in a dismissive or contemptuous way, in a defensive way, or they ghost you from time to time, like stonewall you, then they're clearly red flags. Now, in a lot of relationships, one of the things that gets accommodated in that circumstance, in that context, is the relationship develops its own sort of political structure. In other words, power, control, and fear enters the relationship. And it now becomes a matter of determining which partner in this relationship has the most power, who's in control, and who exercises fear or stimulates or triggers fear in the other person. And if I'm not securely attached in myself, one of the things that I'm going to experience with a powerful, controlling partner is my whole issue about abandonment. is going to come to the surface. So depending on how I'm going to articulate that is I'm going to have adaptive behaviours that are actually bad for me in the medium to long term, but sometimes in the short term tend to work. So that's a really important factor to understand. So one of the things that I want everybody who's listening to take out of this is in an emotionally mature, securely attached relationship, there are no power issues, there are no control issues, there is no sense of rejection and abandonment on either side of the fence. And by definition, therefore, being in love doesn't make me do crazy things. As a teenager, being in lust might do exactly that, but not as a mature adult. Okay? So takeout is we do crazy things like Will Smith because I'm not emotionally mature enough. I may have some serious childhood attachment issues and possibly am dealing with a psychological disorder. And so that's a very important aspect. So in the most ultimate sense is love does not require violent behavior of any sort, whether it's towards my partner or whether it's towards other people, even when they're making derogatory comments or are behaving badly. I will use my words to deal with that. And in a lot of ways, the first cab off the rank is going to be to let my partner, my female partner, articulate how she wants to deal with this. I'm not just going to jump in. You know, I've watched this happen time and time again where she goes, "Why? What are you doing? Why are you standing up for me? I didn't ask you to do that. You're just making it more difficult or more problematic." And especially if you're acting out, either aggressively or violently, that is just completely off the charts. So in a healthy relationship, you know, my view is that Jada, the moment Will was getting out of his seat, if I was Jada, I would have put my hand on his arm and go, "I love you, dear, but sit down, okay? I'll deal with this later." And that would have been essentially the end of the story. We wouldn't have had a slap that went around the world. And, you know, people could have focused on something that, you know, in the bigger scheme of things, maybe had more import. Although, having said that, I think this is a useful talking point. I think we really do need to get on top of what it is that makes strong, healthy, long relationships. We got a divorce rate of 52% roughly. That's not a good innings. Okay, some more food for thought. Reflect on it. Check in with yourself about how you are in your relationship. Remember, patriarchy makes bad bedfellows. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email miranda@nortainment.com. That's miranda@noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.